Hi everyone, thanks for joining and welcome to today's webinar. We're looking at how to make the most of IP assets in the focus on IP assets in different sectors, and we'll be talking about the specificities in each. So we'll also have a final with a special guest for an insight into some wonderful destinations. So let us know and we'll be happy to discuss them then. So today you've got a couple of presenters. You've got my colleague Morven.
Hi.
Who is the Senior Manager for IP Sales in the Corporate Recovery and Restructuring team. And then you've got myself, Saj Ali, and I'm the Manager in the IP Valuation team, where we focus on the valuation of going concern and solvent companies. So a little bit about who we are. We're Metis Partners and we're an intellectual property valuation firm, and we have a proven track record in the assessment, exploitation, monetization, valuation and the sale of IP assets. So we're based here in Morven today. We do also have a presence in North America with a Californian office, and we do work with companies in Asia, and we've also recently opened an office in Central Europe. So that just showcases how the sale of our IP assets can spread globally. And our corporate recovery and restructuring team provides commercial, practical advice on how to deal with IP and insolvency or distressed scenarios. Keep in mind we're not lawyers, we do take a commercial approach and try to provide commercial solutions to IP issues and insolvency. So today we have a few things on the agenda. We'll start with introducing what we found to be the most critical IP assets in the energy sector. Some of these might be quite obvious, where some may be a little bit more obscure and not always easily recognised or identified. So identifying both formal and informal IP assets is our area of expertise. We do combine different tools such as research and public sources with speaking to management, and the key here is really about asking the right types of questions. So ultimately the purpose of this webinar today is to help you think about what IP assets exist in the energy and renewable sector, as well as sharing our experience of different assets in the sector and key takeaways as to what to do in your next case, and the main points to think about following this webinar. Let's give a brief recap of some basics to IP for those who weren't at the last kind of webinars, and also for some of those who were. So a quick recap of what IP is and how to look for it in insolvency. And also, if you do want some more information on this, please have a look at our previous webinars, and if you need a link, just let us know at the end. So as a quick overview, we'll be touching on some more notable kind of formal IP assets, such as things you may recognise like brands, and which can be underpinned by registered or unregistered trademarks. There's also some more technical IP around maybe how a product looks, such as the design, or maybe how a product works, or a new approach that you'd find within a patent. There's also some IP which becomes more prominent, or has been becoming more prominent as time goes on, such as software and data, and that can be part of a product, or it can be the entire product itself. If it's a company selling software. You can also have some other brand related assets such as websites and domain names, or now and again in the sector you may also find original pieces of work which could be protected by copyright. Trade secrets can also be pretty crucial to a business in the energy sector, if that tends to underpin how they operate. And lastly, you've also got organisational knowledge, such as technical specifications or test results and manuals. Again, these can be really critical to the continuity of a company.
So we thought we would continue with a quick poll just to make sure that everybody's staying awake. So this is the poll that I'm about to launch. This should have launched now. So this is a company with which we have been involved, but the company is anonymised currently due to confidentiality. The company was involved in the energy sector and had more than 100 million invested in the company. Of the company's annual operating costs, around 5% was spent on patent portfolios, so renewals, 10% was spent on prototypes, around 20% was spent on technology, and 5% was spent on test data. The rest of the annual budget was spent on operating costs like employees and overheads. Now, what turned out at the end of the day, what turned out to be the most valuable asset in the whole portfolio? I'll give you about, I don't know, 20 seconds to go amongst yourselves and have a quick go. So just as a quick recap, around 5% was spent on patent portfolios, 10% was spent on prototypes, 20% was spent on technology, and 5% was spent on data. Now, data seems to be the most popular. It's an early leader. Patent families are going. Technology seems to be the poor cousin, that must be said. Now, I'll give you five. Yeah, it's getting closer. I'll give you 5 more seconds. 3.
Some slow thinkers, I think we've got. It's a Friday afternoon, so we'll let you off.
All right, well, thank you very much. So at the end of that, we had 33% who went for the patent families, 13% went for the prototypes, 4% went for the technologies, and 50% went for the test data. Now, I have been a little bit mean. The answer is actually none of them. The part the purchaser was actually interested in was one patent family of the company, and that patent family therefore represented about 0.25% of the annual operating cost of the company. It was a good return, and that one patent family he wanted because of the infringement value that he could use in order to pursue litigation. So I think for us the learning point out of that was always to think outside the box for purchasers rather than just for those that are in the sector. Oh, apologies. So we are going to go through a quick overview of critical IP assets in the energy and renewable sector. Now, bearing in mind the size of the energy and renewable sector, that can encompass a wide variety of assets. But broadly, when we're thinking about energy and renewables in this webinar, we're thinking about oil and gas, and wind turbines, water turbines, solar, and other developmental technologies that have been used to generate energy. Now, there are some common themes across the sector, as wide as it might be, due to the industrial nature. So, for example, these things are likely to comprise the patents. Then, in oil and gas particularly, accreditations and certifications can be extremely valuable, given the time and resource that can take to acquire those. And trade secrets are also a common IP asset across the sector, as the know-how behind a patent portfolio, for instance, or the know-how behind a specific way of doing something can be a closely guarded secret. That goes hand in glove with organisational knowledge that's on a server as to potentially to do with projects or business plans. All that kind of information that is really useful to either competitors or those out with the current sphere of the sector. Now, it's important to be aware that sometimes pre-revenue companies in this sector can get a bit focused on technology targets and less on financial targets. And if that has been the case, it's important to check whether the commercialisation plan they had was viable at all, or whether a new purchaser would need to come up with an entirely different way of commercialising the technology. Now, I'm going to go into these in a little bit more depth now. Now, what are patents? Patents cover or protect new inventions and cover how things work, rather than what they look like, which is what designs are. And how can you judge initial value when you're thinking in your next insolvent case and there's some patents? How can you have a quick look to see whether anything might have value in there? One of the ways that you can tell is by citation analysis. Now, that just means that patents that cite other patents as prior art. So those patents that kind of form the building blocks for future inventive steps or future ways of development. If you have one of those broad-based patent families, then those can be really valuable because a lot of different companies will be using that that technology, and you can potentially monetize that. Litigation is also a key way of judging value. If there has been a lot of litigation around a patent, or the patent has been used for litigation purposes, then that can demonstrate significant value to any purchaser because they could use that to fund a revenue stream. If patents underpin key technology, that's also really important, or whether it depends on whether they've been used as a marketing tool or whether that's actually integral to the technology that has been developed. And finally, there's a big value difference between a granted patent and an application. Granted patents clearly have much more value than an application does, although that's not to say that an application would have no value whatsoever.
Yeah, and just to add there, it's also important to consider on that last point, the territories that the patents themselves also cover. One thing you want to ensure is that it matches the key territories that the company is actually or was operating in and commercialising the patented products. So it's good to make sure that they have the adequate protection in that case.
Next is accreditations and certifications. So for instance, designs for subsea vehicles or subsea equipment, what certifications might have been achieved by the company during the course of using the product. For subsea equipment in particular, for oil and gas in the North Sea, there are occasions where each piece of equipment needs to be individually certified at a number of different build stages. So it's not simply that the product or piece of equipment can be certified and then you can go and use it however you like. Sometimes what can happen is that you need each stage of the build certified. So when we're thinking in insolvency about accreditations and certifications, the key value indicators or the key points that should be thought about are transferability of the accreditations or certifications. So can they be transferred, or does it relate exactly to the company and for the exact purpose for which that company was, or is it slightly more general than that and that could be transferred? For that, it's important to know who the accrediting body is. Many of the accrediting bodies are very helpful and can help you sort out which parts of the certification might be able to be transferred and which might not. And thirdly, all the paperwork and bureaucracy that goes with obtaining a certification can be really valuable to a company that might not necessarily have that. They might be able to use the paperwork to gain their own accreditation, or they might be able to resubmit the same information to the accrediting body to easily get the accreditation that they're seeking. Now, trade secrets. So broadly speaking, a trade secret is any information which gives an advantage over your competitors because it's not generally known or readily available by proper means. So virtually all companies in the oil and gas sector have trade secrets in some form or another, and the trade secrets can comprise some of the company's most valuable assets. So in terms of the types of information that could be protected as a trade secret, normally the way that you can check whether it's a trade secret or not, it needs to have kind of some economic value to the company. It can't be generally known, and there has to have been kind of reasonable efforts to maintain secrecy. So for instance, password protecting information, or making sure that some parts of the server, for instance, might not be available to all employees. These are key ways of trying to keep a trade secret. So in the oil and gas sector and in the renewable sector, that could be anything from seismic data or core samples or lab books, initial production data or drilling schedules, Or there's also a substantial number of chemicals that are used in fracking, and the exact compositions of that would be classified as a trade secret. Just to give you a kind of an idea of the strength of trade secrets, in 2012 some analysis was carried out that companies in the US that claimed trade secret protection, they claimed 29% of companies in the fracking sector in Texas had claimed trade secret protection for chemicals used in hydraulic fracturing fluids. So it kind of gives you an indication as to the extent of trade secret policy.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that obviously trade secrets can come in many forms, as Morgan's touched on there, particularly in the kind of energy sector. So it's always worth asking the question to find out exactly what the company considers confidential or commercially sensitive information, or may just be something that they don't want a competitor to get their hands on, essentially.
And finally, organisational knowledge. So as we mentioned earlier, organisational knowledge is basically the information that's on a server that might be to do with projects, it might be to do with strategic information, it might be to do with kind of basic understandings of company processes. That is all information that is likely to be classified as organisational knowledge. The key factors or value indicators that we would see in terms of selling or valuing intellectual property assets from insolvency are the file structure. Is it well structured? Are you able to adequately access information? Are there any employees that could be used to provide guidance on what exactly and where exactly information has been stored? Can any purchaser carry out due diligence? They're likely to want to check, for instance, that project files might have actually all the project information that would be useful to carry on with projects or to work out how a company had done something. And one of the points to be aware of, just in general in insolvency, is that excuse me, that when you're thinking about transferring the organisational knowledge once you've sold the assets, it's important to be aware that you need to be able to either transfer the cloud to a purchaser, or if you're transferring it via hard drive, that needs to be thought about. It's also important that if you copy the files, make sure that the file has copied appropriately in order to provide any purchaser with as much information as possible. So, kind of particular IP considerations that we would see in the energy sector are prototypes and pilot plants. So although assets need to be apportioned clearly between physical assets and IP, it's important to remember that if prototypes of developmental technologies have been developed, then they can be considered an extension of IP assets to both purchasers and the directors of the company. So IP is likely to be embedded in pilot plants and the prototype. If someone has the prototype, then they are able to manufacture or replicate what has been done, and they might be able to reverse engineer exactly how it's been done. Now, clearly, if you had the intellectual property assets to go with it, that would your time in reverse engineering would be significantly reduced, but it is still a concern. And if it's a concern to a purchaser, obviously that means that the value is likely to be diminished. So you're likely to increase the value of the whole portfolio if prototypes and pilot plants can be sold as part of the intellectual property assets. Secondly, in the energy sector, as we mentioned, patents are of particular interest in this sector. There are a number of concerns when selling the assets as to how costs can be reduced in administration or liquidation, and what the dates are for getting renewals sorted. Sometimes these can creep up. There can be grace periods, and it's important to always be able to ask either your intellectual property agent or the patent attorney what dates are absolutely essential in order to make sure that none of the patents lapse, and what would be ideal if you could pay the patent portfolio. Clearly, there's not always the funds to do so in every insolvency, and it's important to be able to take commercial decisions about what costs can be reduced and what can be extended.
Yeah, you'll be surprised to know that there can be instances where a patent portfolio hasn't been managed appropriately, and some can even be allowed to lapse accidentally. So if the renewals haven't been paid, so it's definitely worth kind of considering and paying attention to.
Finally, niche technologies are of particular interest in this sector. Niche technologies can be very dense and technical, and there can be a number of different owners. It's important, particularly in the energy sector, where there can be joint ventures, for instance, or licensed in intellectual property assets, like software, or different types of patent portfolios that they were using for different technologies, that you're aware of all that, so that you're aware which parts actually belong to the company and which parts are licensed in and are likely to have fallen upon the company's insolvency. Finally, to illustrate hopefully what we've been talking about, we're going to be running through a quick case study. So in terms of this one, it has been anonymised for confidentiality, but the case was carried out here. They had numerous different types of intellectual property assets. They had patents, they had software, trade secrets, there was quite a number of trademarks. There was nearly every type of intellectual property asset that you could possibly think of. It had driven millions in revenue, but the technology wasn't optimized in its current location. So there were a number of key considerations, but one of the key considerations, particularly the energy sector at this type of level, is that it's a very international sphere. Time zones became a problem with international parties who were looking to carry out due diligence, and they also had differing experiences of different insolvency regimes. So it's really important to get everybody on the same page to work out that to work on the UK insolvency regime, and what guarantees or indemnifications could or could not be provided. Key knowledge workers were also an important consideration in this case, with a number of the workers spread across Europe, being able to gather them all up and make sure that they all went with the technology was really important for the purchaser, because they wanted to generate the revenue as quickly as possible, and that is sometimes easiest achieved with employees' help. There was also a number of different costs that came up during the course of the case, with £40,000 being allocated for a software license, which was critical in running the technology, but wasn't actually wasn't actually developed in-house by the company. The patent portfolio also didn't have very long to run. There are around 20 years of life in a patent, and once it starts to get to the end of its life, obviously it's important that the purchaser was aware that they didn't have long to monetize the patents in that particular technology. They would have to rely on trade secrets and other forms of intellectual property rather than simply the patent portfolio, which was about to run out. Finally, there were issues with transferability of the server. There were very few employees who were left, and none of them were part of the IT team. And unfortunately, the file names were very long on the projects, as I'm sure you can imagine. So unfortunately, they were not able to be transferred appropriately. We needed to figure out a number of different solutions in order to make sure that the purchaser had as much information as possible. So hopefully that gives you a quick overview of how intellectual property can impact in the energy sector and selling the intellectual property assets from insolvency.
Okay, so just to summarise on some of the main points we'd like to kind of get across, and some things you might think about today. So first thing is just to consider getting to grips with any potential ownership issues. It may not always be as straightforward as you think, so it's worth getting to the bottom of it. Also pay special attention to fees to ensure that nothing is missed, and that no kind of valuable assets are affected. Also think about prototypes and pilot plans, as Morgan touched on earlier. This can extend the IP and uplift the value potentially to any potential buyers. Also find out if you have access to technical staff who regularly are able to provide valuable insight into the development and the background and also the kind of context of the IP and the business. And lastly, beware of any licensing issues in case of any inadequate terms or agreements, which again may affect the value or what you're able to do with the IP itself.
This is our intellectual property asset checklist, which we hope you might find useful on your next case. We will send it to you following the webinar. And finally, just thank you very much for sticking around and listening to the webinar. We hope that you found it useful. If you've got any questions, then please let us know in the comments and we can go through one or two of them. In terms of the next Insolvent IP webinars, there's one in a month's time called Publish or Perish, who owns IP assets in the publishing sector. Then there's one on the 10th of November on pharmaceuticals and medical devices. And finally, as Saj mentioned, we will be holding our Christmas special, the question and answer session. Now, I can't see any questions just now, so thank you all very much for listening, and we hope you found it useful. Do get in touch if you'd like to discuss any of your cases at all, and we also provide free training for CPD points, so get in touch if you'd like to learn more.
Goodbye.